Thank you. Just to introduce myself again, I am Gordon Gooding. I am a licensed clinical social worker here on Long Island. And today we're going to talk a little bit about facing codependency. And Liana, if you could just introduce yourself briefly.
I'm Liana Ross. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a CASAC, which is a credentialed alcohol substance abuse counselor.
Great. So, and I know we've done this before, so I love talking to you off phone, on phone. So this is kind of the, looking forward to this. This topic, when we kind of brought this up, I know we were thinking about things to talk about. And the issue of codependency is something that I know in my private work, and I'm sure you see it too, as a CASAC and just as a mental health counselor, or the work you do, I feel like this idea of codependency is really impacts everyone's mental health these days in a lot of different ways. And it comes up in so many different forms. I was really looking forward to kind of exploring it with you a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think at first, codependency comes up not even just addiction, but in relationships too. And not even just intimate relationships. Like I've seen it with friendships, family members,
relationships. Yeah,
work relationships. Like how can we set boundaries when we feel like it's getting, especially in the present day and age, where maybe work and personal bleed together more and more. It's really not just intimate relationships and not just people who are struggling with addiction or their loved one they're struggling with addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in all aspects of life. And I think sometimes there's codependency, and I always joke that we're all codependent in some ways, right? We're all in a lot of us are in relationships, and we do. It doesn't matter what people think of us, so we can't deny that. It's just when it gets to be too much, right? That's when it kind of gets into troubling areas. So when we talk about codependency, what are some ways, like I'm just going to think out loud with you, like how do you see it as a just definition?
Codependency I see as like when our personal emotions are impacted by someone else's moods, feelings, their reactions, when we feel responsible for someone else's response. And something I always bring to people is like, we are not responsible for how the other person acts. We're only responsible for our effort and the way we respond. Another big thing is people pleasing. Huge, and wanting to avoid conflict.
And the peacekeepers. Making sure it's like nothing. Don't bring any issues up because it might rock the boat, so to speak. Right.
Right. And I think that comes with say we have a family that didn't really talk about feelings growing up, and then it's like we finally have a feeling about something, and it's like, how do I bring this up with someone? Like everything is always so good, or it then turns into a really hard time expressing our feelings and being vulnerable because we don't know the outcome. We're taught that expressing our feelings were, a taboo topic.
Yeah. But I think it always comes back to, and I think you put it so well, is that we're not responsible for how other people feel. Right. And so many times in relationships, in jobs, I'm not responsible. If my boss is in a bad day, a lot of people assume it must be me. When I first started my job, it's like, oh my God, if my boss is in a bad mood, it must be me. It's just my own insecurities, right?
Yeah.
And it has nothing. It can have nothing to do with me, right? And the same thing with, we talk about addiction. If someone's using or picking up, it's, oh, maybe I shouldn't have asked them for this or set this boundary, and that's really not it too, right?
Right. So many times I've, even working in the field of addiction, other counselors I hear will say, like, or I guess newer counselors have that fear of like, well, what if someone picks up, like, the counselor feels responsible. And something I've always remembered from the first moment I got into this field was that, like, I have no power over someone else's sobriety or someone else's relapse.
Recovery. That's up to them, right?
Exactly. So, detaching from someone else's own journey is crucial, not even just for that person, but for our own mental health and our own self-care.
Yeah, it's so funny. I just had this conversation with someone yesterday who did not want to, their partner because they were under the influence, failed to meet certain obligations in the home, and it was, there was some opportunity to address it, and it was like, well, we can't do it because they're so fragile right now. We might use, and it's like, and that we don't see, but in our attempts, like I always say, codependency is always so well intentioned, right? The
Yeah.
intention is to protect. The intention is to protect out of love, out of caring, and yet that intention to protect them often perpetuates a problem, a bad dynamic. And maybe it's addiction, maybe it's just a poor communication style, maybe it can be a whole host of things.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's a very important point because, if someone, let's say, is their loved one is struggling with addiction, the loved one then tends to enable that person by tapping their phones, by bringing them the treatment, by their every move, and now their that person is burning out beyond belief, and that person, their loved one's probably still going to use. And if we have someone who's, let's say, not in that situation, they then don't want to maybe bring up a conflict with a friend because maybe they don't want to fight or a confrontation. And it doesn't have to be that way. Again, we're not responsible for how the other person reacts. We're only responsible for the way we approach it. And I always find that so much better expressing how we feel than holding it in, because then if we hold it in, it really leads to a resentment. It just
Toxic.
leads to,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, so much dysfunction.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting. It's, what is it? The old expression in program where it's, and this is so much what a codependency is. The other person, I'll drink the poison and wait for you to die, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's resentment. That's not what happens, right? That's that toxicity of it is just, it's bad for everyone involved, the whole system. And as therapists, I know we look at families, and especially in the addiction world, as a system that plays into it. And if one person's sick, the other person doesn't mean the other person has to be sick too. That's how we change
Right.
the game a little bit.
Right. Exactly. And the lack of boundaries also a really big role, I feel, when like we become over involved in someone else's life, or become over involved in, trying to control the other person, whether it be a family member who's like struggling to go back to work, like how do I kind of like provide them support, but not try to control them. And there's a really good saying that if we try to tell someone what the times, we're trying to control them. And it's hard to take a step back. Yeah. And I always find that attachment style play a large role in our codependency. Like, let's say if we weren't provided that love and affection growing up, or maybe, our parent was struggling with substance use and they weren't emotionally or physically present for us, what's our relationships are gonna be like later in life, right? Like, are we going to have difficulty trusting other people? Or is it going to be difficult to know that our partner is reliable and that their affection is reliable? So always, whenever someone comes to me and they share whether their relationship patterns now, I always love to delve into, like, what was your childhood like? What were your dynamics like? Because 9 times out of 10 plays a huge role.
Yeah, like how did we learn this, right? If people learn at a young age that they're, and if maybe they grew up in addiction, or there's a narcissistic person in the family, or there's so many other priorities, if they learn that my voice doesn't matter, we then carry that into our future relationships. So then we, like, they never learned to speak up as a child. So how are they going to speak up when they're 40, right? Like, it's, it's a skill.
Yeah.
Right. And I think so many times too is, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is that, there's so much shame. Kids who are ashamed, right? That you spoke up, and that now you're ashamed, and that because you can't say that, or you shouldn't say that, or that all that self-centeredness that certain families can come with, that you're not, I always joke, you're not allowed to feel that way. Of course you're allowed to feel that way. Right. So
yeah, the valid.
Sorry, go ahead.
oh no, we're just going to say the validation of our own feelings. And, there's a large role in codependency as well, because let's say want to, if we're walking on eggshells around our partner, around our family member, we're not able to validate our own feelings, and our partner is not going to validate our own feelings. So, over time, we're just going to resentments. But then again, it's a lot of times people realize that that's not healthy. Like, they just go along this life, and 20 years down the line, it's like, why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? Why am I having panic attack? And it's like, it doesn't just begin at that moment where you experience these symptoms. It began like 20 years earlier.
Yeah. And there's that loss of control. Like when I give my ability to be happy over to somebody else, right? That there's codependency, and it'd be amazing. I'm sure we've both been doing this for a while. Like, hey, when I say that to somebody, like, why can't your partner have a bad day and you have a good day? It's like, whoa, what do you mean? It's like, that's, and it is for a lot of people, especially based on like things we talked about here, the belief system as a child and growing up and the patterns of that behavior. It's like, we're perfectly, it's okay to have a really good day, even though our partner isn't, right?
Right. Yeah. Or like wanting to protect other people, or let's say if like two friends are in a conflict and we're outside of that conflict, how do I stay uninvolved? How do I stay as a support, but also separate from that, right? Like, if we're constantly having to fix everything and can't see the suck and sit in the uncomfort, what's going on with us, right? Like, what is like the constant need of fixing? And like, how did that play a role again in the past? Where what kind of arguing went on as a child? Or like, how does that make us feel when other people are doing? And how is it for us to kind of sit back and not involve ourselves? It's okay for people to be struggling. It's okay.
Yes, I love that. Because that's, so many people, like, especially these young kids, you thought it was your job to fix in some way. But that's such a great point. It's like, it is okay for people to struggle, and it's okay for us to struggle, and it's okay that my two friends are upset with each other, and I have nothing to do with it. Just stay out of it, right? That's such a, that instinct for so many people, to fix, to be comfortable being with discomfort, right? It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I love the
it's so
saying.
hard. It's so hard.
There's a saying I have a thing on my wall at home. It's like, not my monkeys, not my circus. I like that idea of. Did you? I
really, yeah.
I love it. It's like, I can't control the monkeys. I can't control the circus. So why am I in the middle of the arena trying to figure this whole thing out? Like, just let them do what they want to do.
Right. Right. And like, wouldn't you love to not be involved in a conflict? I know I would.
Absolutely.
And
it's so much
think
easier.
that comes with like it's like accepting of what is out of control and what's in my control.
Yeah. And the other side is too, and I'm sure when we teach people, or we allow ourselves not to get involved in that struggle, that discomfort, while it's uncomfortable at first, over time, as you learn to practice that, what a relief it is. You're to take this weight off your shoulders that you are somehow responsible for everyone's happiness. It's, that's a lot of stress to carry around all the time, right? Because that's what codependents do, caretakers do. Like, I'm responsible for everyone to be happy, and that's just not true.
Yeah, like responsible for everyone's happiness. And I always, is that possible? Is it really possible to be responsible for someone else's happiness? Like, that's a big load.
Yeah. It's a great way to challenge that thinking. I love that, because you have to, because there's no way. There's none, right? We're responsible for our own happiness, and that's what we can do.
Right.
So are there any things, like, I have a couple of go-to things in my head about what I kind of tell people who are struggling with codependency. Do you have any? I got a couple of quick tips. Maybe we could just share a couple of them here today about what we can do if we can, and listen, I think we all catch ourselves in this role sometimes, right? Of being codependent, right? I know I can, like what could, and sometimes it's more extreme than others, but what are some quick tips to kind of check in or that we can do when we are recognizing, ooh, this is, I'm really putting my happiness in someone else's hands.
Yeah. My clients will laugh because I always talk about boundaries. Like I love boundaries.
I know. I drive my clients crazy too. They're all resenting me out there if they listen to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even just the smallest things. Like I have people, how do we deal when we live with someone? And even just as simple as like, if I can't physically remove myself, I can emotionally remove myself. So how am I taking care of myself? Like real self-care. And I always like to match the self-care with the anxiety or the stressors going on. So if I'm really in this heightened, like emotional place, what type of activities I'm planning for myself that are going to improve my mental health? So whether it's setting boundaries, not answering a text message right away. It's a text message for a reason. We don't have to answer it. And even if they call me, we still don't have it. Like
yeah.
That's on us. And if
Yeah.
that person gets mad at us, we're not on the phone. Well, that sounds like more of a them problem than an us problem.
I just saw, and I think it was on your Instagram today, about that how no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
That's the best boundary. It's like you don't have to expire. Not yet. No, I have to. No. It's just no. I can't. No. Like what a beautiful boundary that is, and it is okay just to leave it that two simple letters, all on its own.
Right. No. And then I can repeat my point. No, I'm sorry, I have something to do today. And if the other person back and is having a hard time with that, I'm sorry, I have something to do today.
Those are not my
Well,
monkeys, and that's
right?
not my circus, right? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that kind of leads to one of the points that I, kind of leads into one of the things I was thinking is how is not to take it personally. If someone doesn't like that we said no, if someone doesn't like a boundary we set, or that we're having a good day and they're not, like it's that's not about us, like not taking it so personally that we're not, again, I keep repeating ourselves. We're not responsible for everyone's happiness, right?
Right. And again, like it says more about what the other person is going through than what's going on with us. Like their reaction says more about them, and there's nothing much to do about that. And if we're feeling uneasy in that, because we probably will if it's new for us, like that's where we can turn to support, whether it's friends who, are healthier for us, or, family members. There's also like 12-step programs like Codependence Anonymous, as well as Al-Anon if dealing with a family member or, someone close to us who is struggling with addiction. Just to be around other people who also have a hard time setting boundaries and codependency, because like you said, we all have it to some extent. It's just the severity and how badly it's impacting us.
Yeah. And I think it's important to really seek out, like you said, seek out people we can get that support from. Sometimes if if someone grew up in a very codependent home, it may not be their family, right? Sometimes it may be because of other things, but other times, like that might, like I always say, systems always want us to come back to what don't change, go back to the old way, go back, conform. And sometimes we need, when we're trying to learn a new skill like this, like setting boundaries up and saying no, and finding our own happiness, we need to kind of go outside again, outside our comfort zone to see who else can bring us that positive message, that support, who would understand. And I think 12-step groups do amazing at that. Like you said, Al-Anon, Coda, like they really, have people who kind of understand that not everyone, people understand that you don't have to do this alone.
Yeah, exactly. And before with the shame aspect, when we isolate, shame builds. So in order to reduce that shame, that's when we have to connect with someone else. And as, you know, people who struggle with anxiety know, the more we kind of stay in a bubble, the more the intrusive thoughts start to come in. And, you know, we hear the voice of, it is your fault. You shouldn't have, you know, shouldn't have denied their text. So kind of like having that validation from other people. Sometimes all it takes is like texting a friend and saying, hey, like I did this, it's really uncomfortable, and having that validation from someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And to question it, to question our own thinking. You know, I always say feelings and facts. You know, there's this message I'm telling myself. Is this a feeling or is this a fact? Is that I am responsible if my partner's upset, or does it just feel that way? You know, wait a second, I didn't do anything wrong today. I woke up today, I had like, think it through. Like, if you didn't do anything wrong, you didn't do anything wrong, right? You could feel it, and that's a real thing. You know, like, I love that DBT skill of wise mind. It's both. You know, you could feel like you did something wrong and know that you're not responsible for someone's happiness, and you've done nothing wrong today. So that this person's being upset has something to do, or this person relapsing has nothing to do with what you've done, right? And that's I think so much one of the great tools of therapy is to start introducing that voice in our head. You know, not just being led by our feelings, but saying like, all right, let's really challenge how our thinking here, and how can we look at this differently?
Yes. Right. Oh, the challenging the thought. I mean, that's why, you know, of course, therapy is very important, because we can speaking it out loud to someone else other than ourselves, who is someone, a non-biased view, doesn't really, you know us personally other than being our therapist, can able to, you know, does have the skills to confront our negative and intrusive thoughts, where maybe, you know, it's harder if someone who is biased to do that for us.
I think one of the best compliments I ever got as a therapist, I'm sure you've gotten it too, is, you know, that they were in a situation where they needed to stand up for themselves, and they heard my voice in their head saying, you don't have to explain yourself, or, you know, something like that. And it's like, and they walk through that, I'm like, wow, that's like, you know, it's like, that's the highlight of being a therapist, right? It's like, oh, they heard it. They heard it. We, whatever that seed was finally took root there.
Right. And sometimes it takes practice. Like start out with like someone who's a little easier, right? Like even if someone who you don't feel it's, you know, you don't have that codependency with them, if they ask us maybe to spend time with them, but we're really busy, practicing saying no, practicing where maybe it's like a less complicated situation, so that when we do enter a little more complicated situation, we're a little bit more comfortable with that boundary and changing the dynamic.
It's such a great point. You know, people want to jump right to the big things that set boundaries at. It's like, no, you're absolutely right. Like, if that setting that boundary in that relation's too much, where can you set a boundary? You know, where can at work this week you say no to something and not explain yourself? Like little baby steps, just like you said. And that's such a great point, because it can seem overwhelming in the big things. But if we start with the little things and grow, and, you know, it's like going to the gym. You're moving a new muscle. It's a neural pathway muscle, right? To practice this skill. And the more we practice it, the better you're going to get at it. You don't start with a 100-pound weight. You start with a 2-pound weight.
Right.
So,
You know, everything's hard in the beginning, but as time goes on and have the support, and it's also okay to struggle. Like I said, okay, like we didn't do our best, or maybe yes, when we shouldn't have, like, that's okay too.
yeah, absolutely. You know, and I always say to be gentle with ourselves. It's a new skill to learn, and do what we can with it. Right. You know, so just a couple other things,
Yeah.
you know, it's how do we catch ourselves and think about this? But, you know, I think in terms of codependency, you know, it's so much easier to battle these codependent thoughts with a support counselor, 12-step group, something, right? Because, you know, it is very isolating when it's just up here, as opposed to really sharing with another person.
Yes, so we don't have to go through anything alone, and remind ourselves of that.
Absolutely. I love that. You know, it always comes down to it. Every time I have a talk with another, it's like, you know, the theory of thinking we're alone and we're really not, you know, we never have to go through it alone. So,
yeah.
I mean, there's so many different aspects of this codependency. I don't want to spend too much time today about, because of, you know, especially how it affects addiction and, you know, listen, I see it too with adolescents and families. You know, there's so many different parts of it where codependency can really interfere with everyone's functioning. And, you know, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
getting in touch with, you know, obviously we're here as therapists, you know, at Long Island Teletherapy. If someone needs something, we're more than happy to be there for people. But, you know, I think, like you said, not recognizing people don't have to do this alone. And there are a lot of solutions to a problem.
Yeah, definitely. Even in the virtual world, we still have therapy available to us.
Yes, and listen, and the great resources too. We were talking, and maybe we'll end on this, but you know, I always say, especially with codependency, I'll just mention real quick. I feel like it wouldn't be a talk on codependency without mentioning Melanie Beattie. If anyone's out there, I don't know if you
Oh
read
yeah.
her stuff with Codependent No More
Yeah.
and the Language of Letting Go book. Like, you know, like if any of this resonates with you, like pick up Melanie Beattie. You know, her books are just amazing, you know, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't really have that much. Then I'll read something and be like, wow, it really hits home. So like, you know, that's a great resource
Right.
to do. And there's so many great podcasts out there and different things that talk about recovery and recovering from codependency and resources out there too.
Yeah, no, there's a lot out there, and I actually just created a podcast, as we
I
know,
was gonna I was gonna
called
ask you to tell us a little bit about your podcast. Yes.
Yeah, so a colleague of mine and I created a podcast. We had our first episode out this week. It's called On Thursdays We Thrive. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And we just wanted to create a relatable, well-safe place where we talk about mental health and therapy through a millennial lens. So it'll be casual, really informative, and we actually got some good feedback, even people saying that they've signed up for therapy after our first episode. So that made us extremely happy. You know, the gift of therapy
That's
is something we all want to give.
And listen, what you're doing is telling people they're not alone. All these things of getting to
Yeah.
therapy and finding people, you know, us therapists, we're not nearly as scary as we think you are, you know. And I heard your podcast. I think you guys did amazing. And you guys, and
Thank you.
you hit the nail on the head about being very relatable, you know, because as therapists, we're relatable people, and you two did a great job with that. And I really, you know, I'm looking forward to hearing more episodes. I did hit the subscribe button, so I'm a subscriber.
Yes, rate, subscribe. I
Yes.
would do, be saying that. So you never
So,
know what path, this will.
yes. So on Thursdays we thrive. That's the name of it, right?
Yep, that's it.
Great. All right, Liana, thank you so much for your time today. And like I said, anybody who
Of
wants to
course,
reach
thank
out
you.
to us, please reach out to us through longislandteletherapy.com. Any parting words there, my friend?
Yeah. Oh, and I'm on Instagram as Therapy with Liana, and you can find me there for some educational, inspirational posts, and again, just trying to spread the message of therapy. So that's the goal.
Excellent. Same with us here. And we just started, and you'll also be able to see this video and others also on our new YouTube channel, Long Island Teletherapy, which the link will be somewhere. I'll figure that out. But it's out there. All right, Liana, thank you so much for your time. Anybody who's out there, thank you for tuning in. And let's have a beautiful and wonderful Saturday, okay? Enjoy the sun.
Yes, you too.
All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.